talk about. It's kind of a hard movie to.
Well,
Oh,
we're live. Oh, speaking of movies, we are live. Welcome back to another episode of the 52 Must See Movies and Why They Matter. And this is a special one because this is our season one finale, a big finale. We've saved one of the biggest for the last. And I'm once again joined by my friend Stephen Billings. Stephen, welcome to the end.
wow. I mean, it's been over a little over a year since we started this thing, man, and with Dan, and it was scary, and right now I'm like, man, finally we're at the end. But probably like next week I'll be like, what am I gonna do with my life? you
I
know,
know.
but we'll see. We'll see what
It's
happens.
been a year, been 52 weeks of movies, and we have come to it. And the biggest one for last, like I said, is Lawrence of Arabia. Came out in 1962, directed by David Lean, which I believe this is the only film on the list directed by David Lean, if I'm not mistaken.
Which is kind of
And
crazy.
this is one of the all-time classics. I mean, I heard about this movie before I even knew what the term classic movies was. I mean, it's that iconic, it's that important. If you're not familiar with this movie, we will be spoiling it. But man, 1962 was a very long time ago. So even if this movie gets spoiled for you, even and I don't even quite know how it can be spoiled for you, because it's not the type of movie that has certain typical movie elements or plot line in it. You know what I mean? Typical movies tend to have, a beginning, middle, and end, and there's like character arcs and twists and all that kind of stuff. It does have that, but I don't think it has the plot that could necessarily be spoiled because it is an epic movie. This movie is 3 hours and 47 minutes long, at least in the cut that I've watched and the cut that I know Steven watched. And that's pretty much the standard cut now, is 3 hours and 47 minutes. It's the one that was approved by David Lean and movie restoration expert Robert Harris in the late 1980s, I believe 1988, when David Lean was still around. And it is an epic movie. And if you're not aware of the plot, essentially this is about the real life person known as T.E. Lawrence, who was involved in the Arab Revolt during World War One. Basically, 1916 to 1918 was the time he was involved. This movie is based on a lot of his writings of the time, specifically his book, The Seven Pillars of Wisdom, which was all about um, his action during that time period. And this film stars Peter O'Toole as T.E. Lawrence, Alec Guinness, Anthony Quinn, Omar Sharif. It is an epic film with epic actors, and Peter O'Toole for me is one of the greatest actors of all time. In my opinion, he's up there in the elite category. It's a shame he actually never won an Oscar in competition for his career. He did win an honorary Oscar, which many people do, but he didn't win one. He was nominated several times, and oddly enough, for his most famous movie of Lawrence of Arabia, he didn't win for this movie. He lost out to Gregory Peck in To Kill a Mockingbird, which is a movie Dan and I discussed much earlier in this series. But just starting off, Stephen, how many times have you seen this movie, and how epic is it?
Well, first of all, it's supremely epic. When I talk to people about, I was actually having a conversation with a friend about the definition of an epic and like what movies fit in that category. And I always say first, Lawrence of Arabia is the definition of an epic. It's not only in its length, but this is shot in 70 millimeter. It's which Quentin Tarantino recently shot his Hateful Eight on. And it's the biggest, basically the widest lens you can shoot on. And yeah, it's fantastic, guys. I mean, and I've watched the movie, I would say probably like 2.5 times. Like I've like watched it in full 2 times. And then like there's been times where I've started it and kind of watched it and it's been on in the background, and you've been, so, but I just watched it again fully for the second time, and it puts you in a trance, man. You get in a trance through the whole movie, like as this guy, because as long as it seems like a movie this long, you would get bored by it, but it's so visually interesting and the acting is so good that you just go along for the ride. I mean, it's that good.
Yeah, I agree. It is a film that I've seen about 3 or 4 times. I once saw it when, back in high school when I was around 17 or 18, and I didn't appreciate it for what it was. I mean, it's just, for a good portion of this movie, it's a lot of walking in the desert, and it really takes a lot of time and maturity and patience to really get as much out of it as I think the film is trying to portray. It's really pure cinema. Like Steven said, shot in I 65, 70 millimeter.
70 minutes, 70. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was shot in Super Panavision 70, and the aspect ratio is 2:20:1, which is a very interesting aspect ratio. It's pretty damn wide, and and if you notice in this movie, before we get into the plot, just technically, since we're here, um, a lot of wide shots in this movie. The movie's predominantly shot in wide or master shots, meaning there's not a lot of coverage or close-ups or shot reverse shots. It's a lot of just the wide scope of what we're seeing, because there's a lot of setup shots and a lot of master shots of the desert, of long shots of people walking in the desert. The way the movie is shot when it comes to character placement and movement, it's shot left to right purposely, because the film is a journey. This is a very long journey, and like Steven said, you feel as if you've gone on this journey along with Lawrence of Arabia, along with T.E. Lawrence. You feel like you've walked through the desert with him, and you've gone through these battles and all of the mental anguish and pain and physical exhaustion that's in this movie. You really feel it. And
Yeah.
if you're able to fully immerse yourself into it, that is. A lot of people do think it's boring. I don't.
I don't. Yeah, I feel it's important that that some people think that movies this long are a little ridiculous, and I'm like, look, the length, it's only as long as it is because it's part of the experience. Like it's like, we talk about, I mean, Dunkirk was not long, but that's an experiential film. And this is the same way, it's a movie that is asking you, like you said, to be patient and to go along with what's happening here. And if you are patient and really give the movie a chance, you're going to become invested because you're spending a lot of time with the characters and the world you're in.
Yes. And to start, and just going into the plot in broad strokes, because like we said, this is an almost 4-hour movie. To go through every plot beat would be kind of crazy. We'd be here for an hour or longer. So starting off the movie, we start off in Egypt. We start off at the kind of British British military headquarters in Egypt. It's 1916, the middle of World War I.
Well, sorry.
Yeah,
that's not the very beginning.
It's not the very beginning. We start off at the end, literally the end of T.E. Lawrence's life. If you're not aware, T.E. Lawrence died in 1935 in a motorcycle crash. And that's the way the movie starts, is essentially with that crash and with his funeral. And you see all of the people at the funeral, and then a newspaper reporter, journalist going up to, oh, tell me about T.E. Lawrence, and they were like, yeah, I knew him. I shook his hand in Damascus. I knew him. He was a poet and a scholar.
I heard a conversation. I was listening to somebody talk about Lawrence of Arabia, and they gave an interesting comparison to Citizen Kane, for that beginning, where we start out at, after his death, he dies, and then you start the movie's about finding out about Citizen Kane through other people. And that's kind of how the beginning of this movie is, where it's like he's dies, but nobody really knew the man. Everybody thinks that they knew the man. And then we finally, after that beginning, go into the past to really learn the story about him.
And that's when we start off in Egypt, 1916, where he is an officer in the British Army. I believe at this point he is a lieutenant. Mm-hmm. He would gradually move up in rank as the film goes on. He goes from lieutenant to major, and then at the end to colonel. But he starts off there in Egypt, and he ends up, and I'm going to be very brief and broad stroke this, he ends up essentially getting this position to go to Arabia to kind of be a liaison. someone to see what is happening there when it comes to the Arab revolt. There's a lot of, I think, political and historical context you need with this movie that the film really doesn't quite provide, but it's nice to go into it knowing a few things, knowing that it's World War One, understanding the kind of geography of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire is essentially modern day Turkey, the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, and Northern Africa, including Egypt. Ottoman Empire was massive. It was carved up after World War One, which this movie does touch upon a little bit, and it's kind of the fall of the Ottoman Empire is after World War One. We'll get into. I'll touch on some of that stuff later. So he has to go there and meet with Amir Faisal, Prince Amir Faisal, who is portrayed by Alec Guinness in this movie. And once again, like we've talked about in other movies, a lot of the minority roles are whitewashed.
Most a good portion of the Arab characters and stuff like that are played by white men, which is unfortunate. But that was just the time, That's just
that is unfortunate. And that's kind of just the way Hollywood is at the time. Hollywood still has that problem today in many of its respects. And what is interesting is that they dressed up Alec Guinness to look as close to the real Amir Faisal as possible, to the point where they had people on set who knew Amir Faisal and thought he was actually him. But if you're aware, Amir Faisal died in 1933. So I don't know why they thought his ghost would be walking around at the time. But they tried to get really accurate. Along the way, he's given a guide. He's going through the desert to meet Amir Faisal. His guide ends up getting killed by the Omar Sharif character because he's from a different tribe, and he drank from a well that he's not supposed to drink from. And right away, you see a lot of the issues in the Middle East that are very much existent now. This idea of infighting amongst a lot of tribal people, different cultures, different ways of life, constantly in conflict with one another. Right away in this movie, that is established, and that's a running theme throughout the whole thing.
Yeah, I think that's one of my favorite scenes. Is that first kind of encounter with the infighting, where what's his name? What's the character's name?
Sharif Ali.
Yeah, and he shows up, and you see, and I saw a thing talking about this shot where you see him off in the distance, and it's a mirage, and they captured that mirage look, which is a fantastic shot, man. And he just slowly starts getting closer and closer, and you're like, is he real? And then they suddenly realize he's real, and then the one guy's trying to fight back. He realizes he's gonna have to fight this guy, and he's too late.
Apparently, the way they shot that specifically is they used a 482 millimeter lens. The cinematography in this movie is awe-inspiring. It's masterful. It won the Oscar. It's literally studied in probably film schools all across the world. When it comes to widescreen cinematography, this movie is second to none. It is incredible. Like I said, a lot of just gorgeous shots, the way they lit everything. And what is amazing about this, I don't want to get off into too much of a tangent, all of this was shot on locations.
Yeah.
It wasn't specifically in Saudi Arabia. It was some were shot in Jordan, some were shot in Morocco, and some were shot in southern Spain all to make it look, but still location shooting. This is long before the days of green screen.
Oh yeah, and also one of the big thing, and it's another thing that's one of my favorite parts of the movie, and the editing of this movie. The editing also won an Oscar, and one of the best shots, best transitions of all time is before he leads in. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's one of the that's in every montage I see. Yeah, for editing or movie.
It's the best transition where he has a match in his hand, and he was before in scenes before he talks about how he takes it out with his own fingers, and he's just letting the flame kind of burn down, and then he blows it out, and it goes right into the sun coming up in the desert, and it's one of the best transitions ever.
This movie has some of the best transitions you'll ever see. In one scene they'll be talking about something, and then it'll cut right to what they're talking about sometimes. Yeah. That shot specifically, I know, is a favorite of Steven Spielberg's. This movie is highly influential on filmmakers like Steven Spielberg and the generation after that. David Lean in general I know is a huge influence for many, many filmmakers. And rightfully so. His films are massively well crafted. But moving on from kind of that, when we get introduced to Omar Sharif as character of Sharif Ali, who plays a very prominent role as kind of a friend and a little bit of an antagonist to the T.E. Lawrence character.
And he's actually, I think, ethnically, ethnicity is actually proper.
It's quite accurate. I believe Omar Sharif was Egyptian.
Yeah, he's either Egyptian or he is,
or he's
Arabian. I think he's Arabian. I think he actually is Arabian.
I think his father's like Syrian and his mother's Arabian. It's something like that. I know he was born in Egypt.
Yeah.
But moving on, Lawrence ends up meeting with Amir Faisal. He meets up with the other British officer that is a military advisor to Amir Faisal, and he basically tells Lawrence, when we meet with him, don't say anything. Let me do all of the talking, completely dismissing the fact that someone else is here to kind of be his helper to help out the situation. When Lawrence's real orders are just to basically observe and report back on what's happening. And as we learn, Lawrence does a lot more than that. He does a lot more than that. So when he's meeting...
And do you think it was intentional that like the friend that he had that got him the job in the first place, do you think that he knew that he was going to take it further than he did?
They must have sent him there for a reason, because right away, before he even goes to Arabia, we know he's a different type of soldier. He's highly intellectual. He's almost too smart for the jobs that he's doing. If you know a little bit about T.E. Lawrence in real life, before he became part of the military, he was an archaeologist as well. So this is a very intelligent person.
I was just thinking that because they knew he was not as obedient of a soldier as others, that they knew he was going to maybe do something more than what he was asked of,
Perhaps. What was interesting is that the person who kind of really gets him, who wants him to be sent there, is Claude Rains. Who we've talked about. Coincidentally, we talked about him in the first episode of the series in Casablanca. So it's kind of coming full circle here a little bit. We didn't plan this at all. We don't plan most things. But at this meeting, we see that Lawrence has differing opinions than the other British soldier with him. He believes that the Arab army or the Arab Revolt Army should go one way, and the British guy believes that they should go another way. And he ends up siding with Amir Faisal, and he ends up winning a lot of respect with Amir Faisal, I think, throughout the movie. And what is interesting is that after this meeting, he comes up with this idea that they should go attack the city of Aqaba. But the reason why it's kind of a foolish thing is you have to cross this desert that is pretty much uncrossable. It is just a massive stretch of land where there's no wells to get water, and it is treacherous. It's basically a suicide mission.
Yeah.
And he decides he's going to do it despite what Sharif Ali says. He doesn't even check with Amir Faisal. He just gets like 50 of his men to join him, and he decides he's going to do it. And the bulk of the first half of this movie is this journey to Aqaba, in this treacherous journey across the desert. And it looks horrible.
Yeah. But it also looks beautiful. But it's also beautiful.
Yeah, but it's also beautiful. It's like a horrible, beautiful dream.
Yeah.
Or nightmare, depending on your situation. And as they journey across this desert, you see kind of how dangerous it is, but at one point, someone's left behind, or someone ends up being falling off their camel.
Yeah, they get dehydrated and they fall off their camel, and nobody notices that he fell. So they, when they finally realize, then
Yeah, Lawrence is the only one to go back for this guy, which is actually a true story. This actually really happened. So he essentially had to cross a portion of that desert twice. And which is the most craziest thing you could possibly think of. And he ends up doing it. And it's kind of extraordinary. When he comes back, he's kind of like a big hero and stuff. the people that are now call him Orenz as opposed to Lawrence because they can't say Lawrence because yeah, the language barrier and stuff like that. So basically throughout the whole movie he's called Orenz. And at one point when you're watching it, you keep calling him Orenz because you're so involved. It's like you keep forgetting that his real name is Lawrence.
But they kind of take him in after that. You know, they give him their own clothes. You know, they get rid of his clothes and give him like kind of like ceremonial clothes.
Yeah, that's the moment where we see Lawrence kind of adopt the Arab culture. We see him. There are several times in this movie where he's, you know, his loyalty is challenged, both as a British soldier and citizen in person, and his allegiance to the Arab cause. That is another running theme throughout this movie: is his sense of self-identity. Where does it actually lie? Where are his loyalties? And this is kind of the first instance, as you said, where he is now adopting the Arab clothes because one, it's probably better to walk through the desert with that. So they do end up eventually getting to Aqaba, and the reason why he decides to attack Aqaba on land because it's impossible to attack by sea. All of the guns and all of the artillery at Aqaba are pointed towards the ocean. So the British Navy, which at this point in history is still one of the most feared navies on the planet, can't attack this place. I believe it's along the Red Sea or around that area. My geography isn't quite up to what it used to be, but it's in that area, and they can't quite attack it because of the guns. So Lawrence has the idea to attack it on land because they won't see it coming, because crossing this desert's impossible. They don't have any weapons pointed our way, so we can take them by surprise. And they do take Aqaba. Yeah. Before they take Aqaba, they meet up with another character, another leader of another tribe, yeah. Audu Abu Tayi, who's portrayed by Anthony Quinn, which is another, whitewashing situation. But he plays him immaculately well. Alec Guinness plays Faisal well as well.
He's got some good comedy relief too. He comes in and sees Lawrence in the clothes and kind of makes fun of him, for wearing, because that's not white man clothes, and then comes over and says, "Why are you guys drinking my well water?" And it's kind of being really, kind of upset at first, but then he kind of realizes that there's nothing he can really do, I think, and decides, hey, you know what? You're welcome. Actually, come over to my camp and let's have a feast, and you be my guests, so. But I think there's another part that's really important too that happens where the person he saves actually almost starts a feud between tribes by killing another person. He killed another person. In that,
yeah, that's what that was where I was transitioning.
Okay.
But before we had to introduce the Audu Abu Tayi character, because he's part of this other tribe.
Yeah.
And what happens is, like you said, is that initially it's very confrontational because Sharif Ali is like the leader of the Harith tribe. The other guy is the leader of the Hawatet tribe, I believe, and they don't get along. There's a lot of tribal conflict in that area and in this movie, and somehow Lawrence ends up convincing the Anthony Quinn character to join them. Initially he's actually employed by the Ottoman Empire, and they pay him like 100 guineas. I forgot how much. I think it was like 100 guineas a week or 100 guineas a month. I forgot. But basically, Lawrence kind of fools him, kind of tells him that, where do you think they get the money from? It's in Aqaba. So when we take Aqaba, you can have all the gold you want. But when they take Aqaba, there's no gold there.
There's paper money.
There's paper money,
gold.
Which
no gold.
Which, when you get to these, because they're referred to as Bedouins, with these Bedouin tribes, paper money is nothing to them. The paper money is nothing. It has to be physical. It has to be gold. That is the currency.
Tradable. Yeah.
Yeah, that is the currency. Paper's not really worth anything. Paper money, our dollars that we use, the only thing that gives its value is us. We're the only people that are really saying that it's worth something, when in actuality, in reality, it's not. So when they do take Aqaba, which they do, but before that, like Steven said, one guy from the Howarth kills a guy from the Hawatet, and it happens to be the guy that Lawrence saved from the desert. And I'm like, oh man, what a waste of time that was. and and Lawrence is like, we're literally like on the doorstep of Aqaba. What is going on? I can't believe this. And he's like, you know what? I'm part of it. The only way to resolve this is the person who killed that guy needs to die. But one tribe, the tribe where he belongs doesn't want it to happen. The other tribe does. You know what? I'm part of no tribe. I'll do it myself. And he does it. And this is the start of another trend throughout the movie where we see the Lawrence character, his actions begin to change him, where his actions, as he goes further and further along this Arab revolt, he becomes different. He becomes a more conflicted character.
Yeah, I think that what it does is it starts to make him being in that environment and the kind of the roles of that place being different than the roles of more political place that he's used to in Britain. It's like he's like becoming a man of no country. He's like somebody that's becoming more and more free and doing things that he would have never done before, like kill a person, and
and we see how it begins to take its toll on him as he gets further and further along on this journey. But after they take Aqaba, he's like, I'm going to go back to Cairo and tell them that we've taken Aqaba. And then Sharif Ali is like, why don't you send like a messenger? And he's like, because if a Bedouin shows up, they're just going to laugh at him. They're not going to believe him. Because Aqaba, they couldn't take it themselves when we took it. So he makes another long trek, another long journey through the desert. And this time he goes with just himself and his two assistants or young servants who kind of follow him throughout the movie, and they kind of, become his servants. And one of them ends up dying in quicksand. And that's another kind of very important part of the character of Lawrence, because he feels very much responsible for his death. He accidentally led him into quicksand. And it's something that is kind of unavoidable. So I don't know why he would kind of put it on himself, but he does. And when they finally get to Cairo, it's one of my favorite scenes in the movie. And when he walks in there, he still has the Arab garb on, and just covered in just sand, like from head to toe, face covered. And then he walks in. He just walks past the guards, walks past everybody, and he goes straight to the officers' dining hall, right? And everybody's in there just having like a nice time. People are drinking nice drinks. They're playing pool. They're talking about whatever. And he walks straight up to the bar. He's like, 2 big glasses of lemonade, and then everybody's like, what are you doing here? You can't be here, blah 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 blah. And I'm like, and then when I'm watching it, I'm like, if you just knew what this guy went through to get here, and the fact that he's he's actually a British officer, he's a lieutenant in the British Army, you wouldn't be saying anything.
Just look at the crystal blue eyes. It's definitely not a guy of that country.
Not only that, but just going from where he was the last time he was in Cairo to where he is now, it's like a lifetime. The things that he's seen, the things that he's done, the journey that he has had already, and we're like 2 hours into the movie, into a 3-4 hour movie, and so he's there, and like the in command, or the British officer that he knew before, I think it was Bryden or something like that, comes and sees him, and then kind of fixes that situation, and he ends up meeting with them to kind of, tell them that they've taken Aqaba, and why it's strategically important to him, and like how he kind of figured that it would be important to Britain because they're moving, from here to here, they're attacking here, they're trying to get to a certain place, and you need Aqaba to get further where you are, and all this kind of stuff, and it's a great moment for me, because it's his first big triumph of the movie. His legend is just starting to grow, and you see afterward that when he's meeting, you see all of the other British soldiers kind of crowding around to hear what's happening. Then after the meeting is over, they all kind of like congratulate him and all that kind of stuff. And
He gets his Rudy moment. Yeah.
yeah, he gets his Rudy moment. Um, and he wants, and now I believe is he's reluctant to be sent back there, but he ends up going to go back there anyway, but he's asking for like a thousand things of explosives, a thousand small arms, a thousand this,
The
artillery and all
money,
that stuff,
the money
and
he owed.
money. And
Yeah.
he's like, money, lots of money. He's like 25,000 whatever. He's like, and the guy in charge, because there's a new commanding officer there, the guy in charge keeps saying yes, 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 and then after he walks away with the Claude Rains character, and Claude Rains is like, "You're not going to give them artillery, right? Because artillery is just a step closer to independence." He's like, "Yeah, probably not." Basically, he says like, "Probably not." And it's like, and you can already tell the machinations. Like, somebody's going to get screwed over in this game, and chances are it's going to be the Bedouins and the Arabs and the tribes. And historically, that's what happened. I mean, that is indeed what ends up happening. I don't think it's at this point in the movie where they talk about the Sykes-Picot agreement. I think that's later on.
Yeah, I think so.
But after that conversation between the commanding officer and Claude Rains, that's when we get our intermission. That is around the 2 hour and 18-minute mark in the movie. So there's still about an hour and a half to go, if you will,
Yeah,
in the movie.
and also we didn't say this at the beginning. There's also an overture at the beginning where you
Yes.
get the great score, which we haven't talked about the score yet.
No, the
Is one
score
of
is
the best
incredible.
all time, definitely.
Oh, it's one of the best. Every time I hear it, I know it's from Lawrence of Arabia. Like it's so
Yeah, it's just so great.
Yeah, by Maurice Jarre, which also won an Oscar as well. It's interesting if you look at some of uh, the making of the movie. They had a couple of other people doing a bunch of things, and eventually Maurice Jarre ended up doing it. It's all you need to know. And then it's iconic. It's just an iconic score. Um, but after our intermission's over is when we get into the second half of the movie, which I think moves really fast. Like the first film, like the first half or the first part of the movie, like you said, is a lot of walking through the desert, is a lot of just getting to Aqaba and all of that, and then going from Aqaba to Cairo. But the second half is when we get the action,
Yeah,
when we get the war stuff.
We got ourselves. It was the first push to get to the point where we're now at like almost full scale, like kind of like war now. With
It's a revolt.
Yeah.
And it's important to know that this is probably one of the most important actions in World War One was fostering or building up the Arab revolt, because you're essentially beating your enemy from the inside. You know, if you can have people rise up on the inside of the Ottoman Empire, and then while you're attacking them from outside, you can hit them from two sides. That's kind of, I guess, their military strategy, the way they thought about it, and it worked. History showed that it did work. So the second half is when we get into the actual detailed revolt. What is happening is first up, it starts off where we meet a journalist who is an American journalist who's from a newspaper, but his newspaper's like syndicated all over the states and stuff, and he's looking for Lawrence. He meets with Amir Faisal. He's asking, where is Lawrence? Where can I find him? And he tells him, well, he moves all the time, but he's the last time we heard, he's in this place. And the Turks are moving from here to here, and the guy's like, wow, the Turks move fast. He's like, yeah, and whatever. They have a nice little exchange there. And this newspaper man, this journalist, ends up following Lawrence on a lot of his journeys, taking a lot of photographs that ended up being in real newspapers across the world. Like, these photographs were published, and you can look at them now online, and it's a really, really fascinating to see how this journalist was able to paint him as a hero, specifically put a face to this person. Initially, what is interesting is his motivations were to show the American people um, a reason to want to get into the war. Because a lot of people don't know this. The United States didn't get involved in World War One until much later on. They didn't get involved until like 1917. The war was over like a year later. So this was kind of a way to try to win the people over. But where we pick up with Lawrence is he and the Arab army are essentially destroying the infrastructure. They're destroying the railways. They're destroying the shipping lines and all that kind of stuff with supplies, and then they're essentially raiding these trains. And right when we pick up is them doing that. We see how they set the charges. We see how they do it. And what we're also learning is that it's really difficult to keep all of these tribes united, especially when they get what they want in material goods. When after they raid these trains, the people take their goods and they go home. They're happy. It's really tough to keep people together for an existential cause, for a cause that's not materialistic. It's not tangible.
They're like a militia. They're like a militia. Like they just.
It's guerrilla warfare. It's essentially guerrilla warfare. You hit and move as fast as you can, and these attacks are quick and they're effective, and that's why he's doing it. And he's working along with, of course, the British military to coordinate these attacks. And their next big place that they're supposed to go to, but their numbers have dwindled down so much that it's kind of impossible to do. They're supposed to go to this place called Dara, or Dara. And this is like an extremely important part of the movie, extremely important part of the T.E. Lawrence character, is you see that his mystique has gotten to his head. He has like a god composition now, or his ego is so big that he thinks he's indestructible. He got shot and he kind of wrote it off as nothing. He's like he says like only a golden bullet can kill me.
Yeah. And I think there's a little bit of a hint of that at the beginning with the whole where he burnt, like I said, he takes the match out with his fingers, and his friend is like, man, that hurts. He's like, it only hurts if you let it hurt, so he's already like at this thing of like, my intelligence is almost more, I'm so intelligent that I can basically, pain isn't there. And he gets shot and he's like, it doesn't hurt, because it won't kill me. I know it won't kill, like it's getting worse and worse,
There is something, I mean, this is an aside, but the real T.E. Lawrence was apparently someone who was a masochist, someone who did derive pleasure from pain. And that could have been part of the reason why the pain didn't affect him the way it would affect us. I'm not sure if they worked that into there, but that's just something that I thought about while watching it.
That's definitely an interesting, that's not something I knew about, but so that's very interesting because that's, that's crazy. I love pain.
There are masochists and people who are into those types of things, but when he's going to Dara, he decides to go alone because by this point now the army that he's leading is kind of going away for the winter. They're not going to fight during the winter, so they've all pretty much gone home, including the Anthony Quinn character, his name I keep forgetting, Abu Tayi. They all went home. He got what he came for. He got a prize. He got one of the horses from one of the trains that they robbed. So he decides to go to Dara by himself, and that's when he gets captured. This actually happened in real life, where he was actually captured. And there's a lot of speculation whether what actually happened to him. It's kind of up to kind of just what he said and what he wrote in his book and in his journals. So no one's quite 100% sure what actually happened, but the way in which the film depicts is that he was indeed tortured. They didn't know that he was T.E. Lawrence. They kind of just tortured him, and it is led for us to believe that he was also sexually assaulted as well. It's hinted at very much so. They don't show it because it is 1962, and you can't really show that in a movie at that point.
And if I read it correctly, also is that the real life T.E. Lawrence there was speculation that he was actually, homosexual, or there was something to that. They decided not to really explore that in the movie, but he is a character that's very much like, you don't really look at him as being somebody that's a sexy character. He's kind
of the real T.E. Lawrence. There's always been a debate about his sexuality, whether he is homosexual, bisexual. Some believe he's asexual.
Yeah.
Some believe that he had relationship with men. He had relationship with men. But in this movie, they don't really delve into that at all. What is interesting about this movie, just an aside, there are no female characters in it. There is not a female character or person in this movie that actually has a line of dialogue, which is fascinating because I don't think any other movie really has that.
So it's the most masculine movie ever. Yeah.
Essentially. I mean, it is tight from the perspective of the fact that it's all about T.E. Lawrence and his interactions with the Arab Revolt. And as we know, women in that type of society don't typically have a lot of freedom and a lot of things to do, especially when we're talking about warfare. We are talking about actual active warfare. We're not talking about, home life and society and culture. It doesn't really go into that much at all. So they're kind of excluded from this movie, which is unfortunate because you want to see women be more inclusive in movies, and it's unfortunate that one of my favorite movies of all time doesn't have that in Lawrence of Arabia. But but going back to this episode in the movie, we see him start beginning to get whipped, and then we see Sharif Ali outside, kind of hearing the what is happening. And then later on, there's a nice dissolve where time has lapsed, and basically they throw Lawrence into the gutter. And this is a very important moment because from this point on, there is a significant change in the Lawrence character. He is no longer the person he was before, and a lot of characters talk about that. Sharif Ali talks about it. The journalist talks about it, and there's a change, there's a difference in him. And what we see over a montage is he's traumatized by the situation.
I think that that situation made him realize that he was not invulnerable. He's not. He could be hurt. He could be killed. He's not immortal. Basically, the way he thought he was.
It's an extremely humbling. Yeah, it's a humbling situation, and that's when he ends up kind of quitting.
Yeah,
he ends up quitting.
He leaves the cause. Yeah,
he leaves the cause. The cause no longer has meaning for him because he believes that he's failed.
Yeah.
And he goes back to Cairo, and he basically wants to resign and ask for a desk job, a job for a normal person, for an ordinary job. And that's when we hear of the Sykes-Picot Treaty. And the Sykes-Picot Treaty, I'm not going to go off on a huge historical tangent here, but it's probably one of the most significant things historically in the 20th century when it pertains to what is happening now. Basically, the Sykes-Picot Treaty was an agreement between Great Britain, France, and pretty much with Russia that after the assumed victory in World War I, after defeating the Ottoman Empire and the Germany and whatnot, and Italy, they would carve up the Ottoman Empire the way they wanted it to be. Britain will take this area, France will take this area, Russia will take this area, and they will basically turn their backs on all of the agreements that they made with all of these Arabic tribes. And that is kind of the basis for a lot of the political problems we have now in the Middle East. The distrust, the hatred between the Middle East and the West, Great Britain, United States, etc., Europe, is all because of this moment, because of the way they were treated post-World War I, the betrayal, and those wounds are still there. So this movie really touches upon that very much so. And we see that especially towards the end of this movie when we finally get to Damascus and the war is over. We see that the reason we see certain political problems. And this is also, and hearing about that kind of maybe reinvigorate something in Lawrence, because he goes there to say that he's going to give up, that he doesn't want to do this anymore, and then he kind of reignites his passion for the fight, and that's when he decides to go back, and he decides to go back and finish kind of what he started, finish for the Arab people, and they go back, and he's different now. When he arrives back, he is surrounded by bodyguards, but apparently these bodyguards are basically the scum of the earth people. These people are like criminals, ruthless murderers and scumbags. And Sharif Ali tells him about that. These people are mercenaries. They're awful. These people can't be involved in here. They're wild cards. They're crazy. And Lawrence is like, pretty much doesn't care. He's like, I've committed murder too. This is the way I want it, essentially. And that's what happens. And they're making their way towards Damascus. And it's kind of a race between Lawrence and the British Army to see who can get there first and who can hold it and who can claim it. Because Lawrence, right now at this point, I think is back to being a huge champion of the Arabic cause, the cause for all these people that he's been with. And he's kind of resented the British because of that Sykes-Picot treaty that he's heard about. So on his way to Damascus, they attack like a battalion from Mezzarine, and Sharif Ali says, no, we'll just go around them. We'll go around them. It's no problem. But this is not the Lawrence from before. This is a Lawrence now who's out for revenge because of what I believe he endured in Daraa. He really wants revenge badly in some way, somehow. And basically they massacre this army. They butcher them like relentlessly, no prisoners. As they run into battle, they yell no prisoners, and they massacre them. And you can see in the battle he's just shooting everybody. People giving up, people like probably lying on the ground that are gonna die anyways, shoots them in the head. And then
no prisoners.
Then at the end of the battle, he's got a dagger in his hand, just filled with blood. He's got blood drenched in his hand, blood drenched in his clothes, blood drenched in his face. And as you're watching it, you're like, none of that is his blood, is it? No, it's the blood of the people he's just viciously massacred. Yeah. And it's at that point you realize that Lawrence is beyond a point of normalcy. You know what I mean?
He's lost
his humanity.
Yeah.
This war has driven it out of him, and it's a nice commentary on what war does to somebody. It changes people. We've seen it in many movies after Lawrence of Arabia and before Lawrence of Arabia. We've seen what it does, and it's really incredible to see. This guy who went from bringing this super intelligent, proper British officer now to somebody who's massacring an army. And it's incredible. But after that, they end up getting to Damascus before the British army, and they get there, and we don't see them attack. They kind of skip over the whole taking of Damascus and whatnot. For those of you who don't know, Damascus is like a huge city in, I believe, Iran now, and it was a big city back then. And to take it probably would have been difficult, but they took it. And by the time the British Army gets there, they've already had it for like a day and a half. They already are, running the city. They set up an Arab council to kind of run the city and whatnot. And right away, we see that there's a lot of problems. The Arabic tribes cannot stay unified together. They can't. Their cultural differences are too much. The mistrust is too much, to the point where they basically say, you know what, it was good while it lasted. It's time for this to end.
They can't find a common ground to unite to be able to keep their existence the way it is.
And what is crazy to me is that some of it is very tedious stuff, but it's tedious to us looking at it from the outside in. But like, there's one part where like, oh yeah, one of the like some place was on fire, and it's like, but there was no power for the water pumps and whatnot, and it's like, okay, get a get a train, a line of buckets full of water to put it out. And one of the guys goes, yeah, well, I forgot, it was the Radual tribe or something. It's like, the Waterall tribe doesn't carry water. And I'm like, it's like that, like, little petty stuff. It's what's going to keep them from, like, being united. It's like, because we don't carry water, we're not going to put out this fire. It's kind of a metaphor for, like, how that the divide is so much that it goes down to something as simple as carrying water to put out a fire they can't do.
It kind of is a metaphor. I mean, it's just speaking to the fact that it's like they don't really want to be united. They don't care. They really don't want to be. It's there's nothing that's gonna fix anything.
It comes at a time where they probably needed to be as united as they possibly could in the face of the West coming in and basically running their territory the way they want it to be. And it's very interesting how much Lawrence knew that, but he couldn't get that message to them. He couldn't convince them. And you see him at the table by himself, writing something out, and I think Sharif Ali was there, and Anthony Quinn's character was there. Auda Abu Tayi is there, and it's kind of the end. It's like this journey is coming to its end, and you can't keep it going forever. Essentially, it's fascinating. It's a fascinating look at just this cultural journey for T.E. Lawrence and where it ends up.
And at the very end, he's, they give him another, like you said, he becomes a colonel. For him, I'm sure he's like, well, I failed at what I was trying to do, but now I get raised in rank. It's weird.
Yeah, it's weird. And also at the end, there's a scene where, like, someone walks in and says, we have 2,000 wounded Turks and only 600 beds to put them in, and basically he walks outside and it's just like, the streets and area just filled with, like, sick and dying. And it's like, this is so far beyond his ability as a person that he cannot, do this. So he just starts laughing. He just starts laughing because at that moment, I think he just breaks psychologically. Like, it's too much for him. That's when he gets, like, slapped by one of the British officers, like, losing his mind. And then after that is when he gets risen to the rank of colonel.
Yeah, that, and just probably just laughing at the fact that he thought at one point that he could control all this, but he realized it was ridiculous. That he's just one man. He can't fix this whole country.
Yeah, the problems here are too much for him.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the end of the movie.
Yeah, he's driving. He's in a Jeep.
He's sitting in a Jeep and driving, and the guy goes, home, nice, huh? And even at the end there, home doesn't have the same feeling for him, because he asks the guy, what? Almost not the fact that I don't think he heard him, just because the fact that I don't think home means the same thing that it used to mean. Yeah. Because he's like you said, a man of two worlds now,
and he sees
both worlds have kind of rejected him.
And he sees that, and it kind of calls back to the beginning, which is the end, of course, where he dies, where he sees a kid on a motorcycle up ahead of him, and that kind of harkens back to how he dies on a motorcycle,
Yeah. Yes, it does. So that is Lawrence of Arabia. It is a sight to behold. Like I said, rewatching it really puts it into perspective of how important the movie is, how essential the movie is. It's one of the all-time great masterpieces. It is probably, in my opinion, the best epic ever. The scale is
it's insane. Yeah, the scale is insane. I think, and I meant to say this earlier, it has one of the greatest lines, and they've reused it before. Big things start in small. Big things start out in small something.
It's like big things have small beginnings.
Small beginnings, yeah, and they use that in Prometheus.
Yeah. The Michael Fassbender character is watching Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah. He kind of tries to make himself look like.
He cuts his hair. He cuts his hair to look like Peter O'Toole, who, like I said, is one of the all-time great actors. The acting in this film is incredible. Just a couple of things. This movie did win 7 Oscars. Like we've been hinting at this whole time, we mentioned a couple of them. You know, it won Best Picture, Best Director, Best Cinematography, Best Art Direction or Set Direction, Best Sound, Best Film Editing, and Best Musical Score. So it is highly decorated, but yeah, didn't win Best Actor though. Always kinds of bothered me.
Yeah. And getting into the essentialness, man. I mean, it's influenced, like you said, a lot of people, Spielberg especially, and Star Wars, just the desert stuff, I mean I mean, it's one of them movies, man, that I think just is timeless and will continue to be one of the great films of all time. I mean, it's immaculate. I mean, it's great.
Yes, and since this is our final episode, the person who started this all has decided to say a few words here at the end of season 1 and previewing season 2.
Yes, I wanted to make sure that I got on here at the end. These guys are going to host Lawrence of Arabia. That was a plan all along. And I just wanted to say I could not have done this without these two guys, Andrew Cabral and Stephen Billings, who have been the rock of the 52 must-see movies and why they matter. There was times where I think some of us did not even want to do episodes, and we just kept trudging along, and we just started cranking them out. We were watching movies that we had never seen. Specifically, Steven had watched a lot of movies he had never seen, and he bought the DVDs or the Blu-rays or whatever, and I was watching. And if it wasn't for Andrew and Steven and also Mark and Billy at the beginning, who did some episodes at the beginning with me, we couldn't have completed this series. And I needed some of the motivation sometimes. I got a big kick in the backside from a guy in North Carolina a couple times. Hey man, we got to get this thing going. We got to crank them out. We got to start doing more.
That was me, by the way.
Yeah. And so I just wanted to say thank you. I cannot say thank you enough to these two guys right here. They have been amazing. And I wouldn't have come on this season 1 journey based off the book, which I just showed you, based off this book by Robert Osborne and Jeremy Arnold. If I knew that I didn't have people that could really articulate these movies and what they were all about and really come across as people that knew what they were talking about and had a real genuine love for film and the things that they were talking about. And I'm amazed that you guys are just so awesome in this show and in this series. And that leads us into season number 2. This went so well that I decided maybe, I don't know, a month or two ago that I was going to do season number 2. We're going to have more guest hosts. We're going to have a lot more modern films because of obviously the 2 modern films in the series is This is Spinal Tap and Annie Hall, 1986 and 1977. We're going to have more modern films, more popular films in season 2. I got more hosts, but I do want to put it out there. Andrew and Steven, you guys are welcome to be on any episode of season 2. If you have a inkling to say, you know what, I feel like I want to talk about something, I'll have you on anytime. You just let me know. I could never have done this without you two guys. You guys have been phenomenal. And I just think hopefully what we've done is educate people, teach people about these films, about these filmmakers, about these actors, about the world of film and the different things that went into in all these different kinds of films. And if we did that, I feel like this series accomplished what it set out to do in the first place, was talk about great films, but also teach people about films maybe they had never heard of, because obviously you and me, the three of us, watched films we never saw. So we learned things about films that we never saw. We got to see and talk about films. So we not only we were putting it out there to teach people and hopefully people learn from this series, but also we learned from the series as well as a group. And I am just so through the moon with excitement of how much I appreciate you two guys. I can't say enough about how much you guys helped me out. And season 2 looks like it's going to be a great season with a ton of great movies. And I already filmed the first 2 episodes, or recorded the first 2 episodes, so they'll be coming out in April. But Andrew and Steven, if you guys want to say something, feel free to say something on your own. Andrew, go ahead if you have anything you want to say.
It's been a long journey, but we're glad it's over. And hopefully many more people have many more insightful things to say about other films coming up. There will be new films like Dan has talked about, a lot of more modern stuff, because the book only goes up to like 1984 or so. So there's a lot. We all know there's been a lot more movies in the last, 40 years or 30 years. And yeah, hopefully everyone keeps sticking around to keep watching them. It's been a pleasure doing these. I mean, I love talking about old movies, and I love revisiting old movies, and it was always something I wanted to do, and this was a nice area for me to do it. I get to help out Dan, and I get to talk about what I love to talk about, movies.
Steven?
Yeah, this was fun, guy. I mean, yeah, sure. There were times where, we were like, okay, damn, we still got like 25 of these to do. Like, it got a little tedious. We wanted to do a lot of these, but it takes time, man. Some of these movies, like Lawrence of Arabia, we felt like it was important that we rewatch the movies before we talked about them. So, it's almost a 4-hour movie. That takes a lot of time. That took most of my day up just to watch that movie. I feel like, even though there's more hours in the day, but it feels like it takes up your whole day. And we've done Gone with the Wind. We've done some of these movies are huge. So it's like, it's a little bit of a commitment, but it was worth it, man. I like, we started out doing it, and there was no stopping us, because I know for me, I don't like to start stuff that I ain't going to finish. So it's like, I think that was a good thing that we accomplished here. We drove through this whole book, and now for season 2, Dan and his main co-hosts, me and Andrew might pop in on some maybe down the road, but he's got a whole group of other guys that he's going to be doing some stuff with, and they've come up with their own list now. Now this is like an original new season of 52, where the guys have kind of all, done a whole amalgamation of their ideas of some essential films throughout history. And there's so many films that are worth talking about that you could do many. This could be like American Idol, you get 12 seasons, you can go on forever with this show, So, hopefully, you guys continue to have a lot of fun talking movies, and we'll hopefully stop in maybe every once in a while to do one. I'm not really sure what's all on the list right now, but I know I'm doing the thumbnails, so I'll figure them out.
Yes. Once again, another thing that Steven did, he did all the thumbnails. So when you see the book and then you see the name of the movie or a photo of the movie, Steven did all those at the beginning of this season. And, I can't say enough. I just appreciate everything you guys have done. And you guys are always welcome to come back and do some of the second season, because there's a lot of great movies in the second season that I know that you guys are probably a fan of. But for Mark and Billy and Steven and Andrew and myself, thank you for watching season 1 of the 52 must-see movies and why they matter. Good night.